So, Assalamu alaikum, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this final session of the Muslim Institute Post 9/11 Great American Novel Book Club. This final session will combine um, two novels which have been left outstanding, which is Submission by Amy Waldman and John Updike's A Terrorist, and then we're going to open it out into a wider review of the post 9/11 novel genre and touch on a few other things. And so I'm going to hand over to Sharia Sheikh to to introduce the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. And to start off, I want to thank you again for setting up this brilliant 4 sessions that has turned into 3 sessions, but a great series of book talks which has enabled me to fully explain my research and lay out the ramifications of it, as well as to get feedback on every aspect from the participants who have been fantastic in every step of the way. Thank you so much for participating and for eagerly sharing your ideas. It's been a beautiful experience for me, and it's been a new experience for me to do this online and rather than in person in one session. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much. And let's start. So from the last session, you might remember, which was around 3 weeks ago, that we were talking about the post 9/11 novels, the initial ones that have always been paired in the study of the post 9/11 literature, Don DeLillo's Falling Man and Jonathan Safran Foer's Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And before that, we were talking about the introductory concepts. So I'll just briefly go through what we've talked about. The Great American Novel as a concept, as it started in 1868, and then went through multiple iterations of and multiple different novels which examined the American dream as it related to emancipation, merit, and other American ideals that have been touted as American ideals, but are universal ideals, as we all know. But American exceptionalism tries to own them as just an American concept. And then post 9/11, how it shifted completely to how and what should be the dream of returning America to the pre 9/11 innocence of there being no Muslims in the limelight in America, and what to do with the Muslims. What is the answer to the Muslim question as it's been framed in many of the novels. And then we talked about in the two novels, the Jonathan Safran Foer's, about the repression, how the Muslim figure is absent completely, and how in Don DeLillo's novel, Falling Man, the Muslim does not appear, but artifacts of Islam, such as the Quran, such as Islamic textuality and Islamic names are discussed in more detail. And then they're appropriated and changed into something else. And both of those mechanisms of dealing with the Muslim question creates this specter of the Muslim other, which is this menace, this horde-like menace that is very uniform in nature and wants to do away with American ideals, dismantle American ideals and clash with American ideals. So that's the two novels that we discussed so far. And now we're going to move on to quickly to other novels and to other mechanisms within them that by which the Muslim question is addressed and represented in being addressed by white Americans. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the conclusion of my research, but also the open questions that it leads to, and that I would love to discuss with you at the end. And also a few further reading texts that I do recommend to get more information, more knowledge, more thinking about this. That's this topic. So John Updike's Terrorist is the next novel. I'll tell you a little bit about Updike. Updike became very well known as the writer about middle to middle upper class America, suburban white characters. He wrote a series of novels and short stories that became very big very soon. He was very precocious in his writing, and his early writing is magnificent. In short stories, he has been able to create worlds, and he was a master of the short story medium. And then he created the 3 novels. They're called Rabbit Run and the Rabbit series, based on Rabbit Angstrom and his midlife early life to midlife crisis, a retired basketball professional, and wonderful novels, and he won several prizes, Pulitzer Prize, and he's been awarded the highest honors. Before his death, he was awarded the highest honors. In the post 9/11 world, he created his own version of the post 9/11 novel called Terrorist. And in this, he wanted to explore what Islam in the post 9/11 moment means in how it continues to exist within America. Now, his treatment is probably the most racist and Islamophobic treatment, and outwardly so. He has been quoted in interviews saying very Islamophobic things, such as Islam is a is a radicalizing ideology, as well as nobody can make sense of it, but I can make sense of it. Very much taking ownership of the genius that people have touted him to be in many over many decades of his literary production. So his book is very well researched. Terrorist is, but at the same time, there's no heart in it. The characters that he creates that are Muslims are complete chess pieces that he moves around. And not to say that they're flat characters, they're worse than that. They're ideologically charged characters. And I'll tell you exactly what the problem with that is. So he creates people of color and Muslims as people who are objects in his novels. The main character is Ahmed Malloy, who is training and understanding Islam. He's a teenager in high school who's going to graduate but has no plan of doing anything but drive trucks. And he is being trained to become a terrorist by his imam at the local mosque. And meanwhile, there's a furniture moving family, the Chihab family, that employs Ahmed. And this Chihab family is Muslim. And they employ Ahmed to move furniture. The whole plot then becomes Ahmed is going to blow up one of the vans or one of the trucks in the Lincoln Tunnel. He's going to blow it up in between New Jersey and New York. So that on the fifth or sixth anniversary of 9/11. 9/11 looms in the background. It's not something that is discussed in detail, but it looms in the background as something that's happened. And the anniversary of it is like this Muslim who's training to become a terrorist is going to blow up another artifact of New York, of America, a symbol of technology, a symbol of progress. Um, the Imam goes running away free into America, and he's not caught at the end. He's the radicalizing influencer of Ahmed. The Chihab man who owns the furniture moving factory, the furniture factory and the moving factory, he turns out to be a CIA asset who planned this and almost helped formulate the plan. So, like a sleeper cell that is completely orchestrated by the CIA is what it turns out to be. But Chihab dies. Chihab is killed near the end by the radicalizing element, by the Imam and his cronies. So he is killed. So the idea becomes that the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. The good Muslims have been killed off in America. Whereas what you need to do and what you're going to have to do with the other Muslims is either to convert them away from Islam or to get rid of them, like remove them from Islam. So what happens is Ahmed's counselor in the school and this is not supposed to be done at all. It is like completely against the law in America even. He starts to discuss religion with Ahmed. He starts to discuss religion and denigrate the idea that Ahmed especially believes in Islam. And this becomes a constant back and forth between them, with Ahmed saying wooden things and the counselor Levy, who is an ex-Jewish or like lapsed Jewish person, saying things like religion, it's path, and all those kind of like humbug things about that. In the end, in a very Updikean way, Ahmed's mother, who is Ahmed is of mixed race, so his Irish American mother and his Egyptian father, who has now returned and is now missing from action. His mother and the counselor, and Updike cannot prevent himself from doing this. He joins them at the hip. They start having sex and they have started having an affair. So the ideological school council, the ideological. So these are called like ideological state apparatuses, which are part of the network of state apparatuses that uphold the ideology, uphold the status quo. So this state apparatus of the school system enters Ahmed's home and sees the radicalization or garners or understands that there's something happening with Ahmed that is not completely normal. So the counselor intrudes into Ahmed's ideology beyond the idea of like knowing him just as a student in the school. He's penetrating the house in many different ways, but also ideologically. He's trying to like change Ahmed's belief system. In the end, Ahmed is going to drive the van under the tunnel, but at a street corner, randomly, the counselor is standing and he hails Ahmed. And Ahmed stops and he picks him up. This is completely unrealistic, but he does that. So the counselor and Ahmed are riding together. And at this point, the only thing, the final thing, after all his argumentation, that the counselor can do is argue that America is worth believing in. So the ideologies, the Muslim dichotomy of like good versus bad, all of that has been happening in the background. But then now it becomes in the van this thing that you have to take Islam out of the Muslim in order to cure the Muslim question, in order to answer the Muslim question. So secularization is used as a tool. But the problem is it's a very linear theory, secularization. What happens is like you don't need to read the novel. It's a pathetic novel. So like what you need to understand is like the Hail Mary idea of like you can at the last moment convince the Muslim not to be a Muslim, but to believe in America. That's the final answer. And Ahmed does not press the button, and the CIA has already like automatically dismantled the bomb anyway, like in the background. But he does not press the button because he's convinced that America is the answer. Religion can be taken away from him and he can be cured. So that's what happens. And the idea is that secularization has succeeded. And secularization is this theory where many lapsed religious people in the West believe that once progress takes linear charts towards an exponential place, such as like our AI moment, such as the internet technology, now that we've reached this point, religion doesn't mean anything. It can be done away with. And societies will progress toward non-religiosity because the empirical world will be seen as the one that we need to live in. And religion is all superstition. So that's secularization theory. And similarly, like the treatment of Islam given in John Updike's Terrorist is that these Muslims need to be secularized, and that's going to save them. But the problem with that is there is the dichotomy not between Islam as a faith and secularization, but the dichotomy is also between Islamic empiricism or a belief system versus Judeo-Christian belief system, which is what America is. It is not a neutral secular society. It is a society that is heavily influenced, heavily entrenched in God we trust, and all those things. The background, the manifest destiny, it's all the religious belief system. It's not that Levy is trying to convince Ahmed to come to America as a neutral, secularized society. He actually doesn't understand what he's converting Ahmed to. That's the problem. So the Western progressives, the Western versus primitive cultures, the religious stagnation versus freedoms, and then the final solution being that conversion is the final solution. So I'll read to you like a brief segment of what happens at the end, what Levy says that what in the truck, what he says that Ahmed should do. Hey, come on, we're all Americans here. That's the idea. Didn't they tell you at Central High? Irish Americans, African Americans, Jewish Americans, there are even Arab Americans. So Jewish Americans, fine, like that's a religious as well as a cultural denominator of a people. But it cannot. But Arab American roots out the Muslim. The Muslim cannot be an American. So it's Muslim American has been rooted out of the possibility of being an American. And so if you want to be an American, you have to be an Arab American. You have to get rid of the Muslim bit. There is the this wonderful thing that so after this little spiel, this tiniest spiel beyond the denigration of his religion from the beginning, Ahmed does convert. He does say, oh, okay, I'll be American. Oh my God, you've taken away my religion, right? That's it. That's the end. It's the conversion. A very naive and idiotic understanding of like what conversion of an ideology means. Somebody from one ideology to another. It can't happen like that. It very simply like that. And it's naive to think that multiple people can be changed like that away from their belief system just because one person has been. And Amitav Ghosh writes about this one spiel, a very important critique. And the Amitav Ghosh being the famous eco-critical novelist, especially of our times. Amitav Ghosh writes, not a word about humanity, family, friendship, sport, poetry, love, laughter. It is as if a belief in American multiculturalism is the only good reason a human being could have for staying alive. Why indeed do the billions of non-Americans who walk this earth refrain from blowing themselves up? I suspect that Updike cannot see that they have any good reason not to. So that's Updike in a nutshell. He believes in America, believes in this continuing myth of like America will self-correct. Don't worry, you will have a chance once you get out of jail, Ahmed, to come live. And secularization will completely change you and help you to see that America is the real answer. That is secularization theory as an answer to the Americanism. Um, and America is seen as healer, as a belief system, but as the final solution, secularization is completely naive, especially because it cannot convert a horde as the other is being envisioned to be. So that's my take on Updike. That's my findings from Updike. That's my critique of Updike, as well as this being his last major novel. He died a year after publishing this, or a year or two after publishing this, but he never came to a an understanding of Islam through all of his research, and only touted those stereotypical like sword verses kind of nonsense, and without getting into the depth of what Islam means in America at the end. Any questions so far before we move on to the next novel? All good. Okay. So, uh, yeah, God bless America. We come to the most complicated treatment of the Muslim in Amy Waldman's The Submission. So, what is happening in this, in the gist of the story is there's a blind competition, and 2 years after 9/11, a memorial is being designed for the spot for Ground Zero. And it's a blind competition with 12 members of the jury, much like a legal case would be decided. So what is chosen as the final design, everybody gets fond of like these two things, either a void, a black, dark void, a jagged edged structure, or a garden, a peaceful looking garden where everybody can go visit. One of the jurors convinces everybody else that the garden is the proper thing. And she's the only, Claire Burwell is her name. She's the only member of the jury who is a victim, a victim by association because her husband died in 9/11. The others are artists and architects. So she says that the garden is supposed to be the most peaceful thing. People can go sit there, ruminate, think about what has happened, and the loss can actually bring life to the thing. The name that pops out after she convinces everybody that yes, this is the design that should be chosen as the memorial, the name that pops out of the designer is Muhammad Khan. Now everybody balks. Oh my God, it's a fucking Muslim, right? So how can this happen? We can't allow this to happen. There is an echo of the Vietnam War Memorial, in which I think a Korean designer was the one who was chosen as the blind designer. But more importantly, this was caused by Muslims. How can we let a Muslim do this? The echo is a minor backlash, but like now it's completely about like what to do with the Muslim thing. Slowly, over the course of the novel, positions develop. Claire Burwell, the victim of 9/11, direct victim of 9/11. So she is part of the 9/11 families, this group of people. Everybody except her in the 9/11 families, brothers who have lost their brothers, mothers and parents, and all that, they are all against having Muhammad Khan design the memorial, the garden. But Claire Burwell stands strong, and she convinces everybody else that yes, this should be the design memorial, that this should be the one that's designed. And then Muhammad Khan finds out that he's going to be the designer. But will he be allowed to do this? There's a lot of back and forth within the society, within and told from six different perspectives. From the brother of a victim, Ne'er-do-well Gallagher, and then an illegal immigrant Muslim, Asma, whose husband died in 9/11. He was one of the cleaners of the building. And Muhammad Khan himself gets a say, finally, in a post 9/11 novel. And he has his perspective, and he's wondering, he's a lapsed Muslim or secular Muslim. He's wondering what to do. He gets inspiration from multiple different Islamic architecture as well as Western architecture, but he can't say where this particular thing has his inspiration from. Meanwhile, media speculation, and there's a hack media person in there with her perspective about how she can spin this, how she can like taint this and sell more product. So she spins how this has been inspired by the Muslim gardens of the East. So this garden design that becomes tainted. And Claire Burwell, whose initial position was American merit, he deserves it. He needs to have this design be put into action and created. Her position slowly begins to shift and then radically begins to shift. She's completely opposed to the garden being placed as the memorial by the end of the novel. Whereas other people shift their position, seeing how it should be designed, because obviously we now realize, yes, Muslim, but like merit. So the positions shift, which is a fantastic like turnaround and examination of American society. And it's also an examination of what was happening in the real world as at the time, right? The Ground Zero Mosque, the idea of the Ground Zero Convention Center, which would have been like a cultural center more than anything else. But no, call it the Ground Zero Mosque and label it for what it is. That thing, right? The American gung-ho approach against anything that seems like the ultimate other at that time. And the Muslims are the ultimate other after 9/11. So the treatment given I'm sorry, I haven't been like changing the slide. Sorry, the American ideals come under test. The liberal versus conservative spectrum is completely examined, and meanwhile, there is a new treatment given to the Muslim. The Muslim is allowed to talk, not in public, but just before the public stage, just shy of the public stage, in like certain forums that are kept between not the general public and the Muslim, but in certain corridors, in a closed forum where the families get to speak to Muhammad Khan and ask him, "What is your inspiration? Is it the garden? Are you trying to build a garden for the martyrs? Do you think those 19 hijackers were martyrs? And that's why you're building that garden? Is there Jannat for them? What are you doing?" Right? And other concepts that are like sprinkled, such as like taqiya and the dhimmi, dependence and other things like that. They try to spout them as researched material. But he's able to cogently answer that I have multiple things that are going on in my mind, and I'm an American, and I believe that my design should get complete recognition, and I want this. He doesn't back down. So what's created is this concept of the adversarial other, who needs to be convinced logically that this is not the time for Muslims to do this. Muslims should not be in the limelight. Muslims should not be enacting their public rights because a Muslim has been causing public terrorism in America. So Muslims need to step back. So they're trying to convince him to do this by creating this adversarial other. And then, is that the end then? Is that the end of the occlusion? A couple of things happen. There is a created equality between the adversary and yourself when you create an adversary as someone you can talk to and try to convince logically, emotionally, as well as like with reason, how they should not be doing what they're doing. There's a dance, a fencing dance almost happening where they're being told, okay, okay, back off now, right? But at the same time, there's also this suspension of the merit-based ideals. The ideals are being tainted. So America is not what it touts itself to be. It is creating an exception within the exception. So there is that. What happens in the end is like again what happened in terrorist in John Updike's Terrorist. The good Muslim died. Shihab over there died. He was killed off. In this one, Asma Anwar, her husband died in 9/11. So she stands up as a voice of reason in the public forum where in the semi-public forum where the families get to ask Muhammad Khan questions. She, as a family member, shows up in that the forum in the little building and asks him a question and also admonishes everybody else. This is not the grief of just white people. It's also my grief. Now, as long as she's assumed to be an American, the merit holds that she has the voice of reason. There, America becomes this like complete weird hierarchy of the families at the top, white Americans in the middle, a little lower than that, people of color, and then at the bottom, Muslims. And Asma Anwar becomes this like multiple force in one person where she's like both a Muslim as well as part of the families. So she's got this dual reality going on. And she becomes this like flux creating spirit when she says that. My husband died, so I'm up here, as well as I'm a Muslim. So America doesn't know what to do, how to react. So they're in this like weird position. But as soon as it's found out that she's an illegal alien, and the hack reporter is the one who finds out that she's an illegal alien, she descends completely to the bottom. She's no longer part of the families that or the victims of 9/11. She's completely a Muslim and a foreign Muslim at that. So that flux, that moment of like pause shifts completely. Muhammad Khan is not allowed to create his garden. He leaves. And then there's at the end a 10 page or 15 page, 20 years later thing where Muslims are finally embraced in America now that the moment of 9/11 has passed. Now that the emergency suspension of merit has been seen to have worked, but now Muslims can be embraced. So there's a retrospective on his works in America, and he's celebrated. But at the same time, there's at the end, Muhammad Khan creates this menacing thing by having created the garden outside of America in the Middle East. He creates this the garden, the same garden that he had proposed, but also inscribes Islamic verses or Quranic verses, and we're not told what they mean, which verses they are, but it's the menace of the Quranic verses out there, and that's where the novel ends. This is Claire Burwell looking at him and saying, "Ah, he did it, and he put Quran in it." So there's that menace of like seeing it from her perspective and seeing it as a nefarious thing. So that's where the adversarial othering thing happen. Things sort of takes not a complete solution because the Muslim is out there. Then he returns 20 years later to be celebrated. Meanwhile, the victims are like just still in their state of like loss. So those are the four novels that I studied. But I also want to talk about one more novel that I briefly touched on in my conclusion in the conclusion of my study, which is Cormac McCarthy's The Road. And in The Road, uh, so it's a post-apocalyptic landscape. A father and son are traversing across the American landscape, trying to find some place warm. And the father will take care of his son to the extreme. He will hurt other people, and he will not share his food until the son exhorts him to goodness, to sharing things that they have very little of: food, shelter, fire. And there's a prophetic figure that appears in the middle, and he's spouting Diridian stuff. But then what happens is the father eventually, and this is not a spoiler because it's a pretty old novel, 2006 by now. The father dies. The son is seen to have found another family, including a woman, who is not a woman is not seen throughout the novel. His mother having died shortly after the apocalypse by choice, but another family finds the child, and then they carry on. A new world is built. The novel won many awards, including the Pulitzer Prize. It became a post 9/11 landmark. It was a beautifully explored post 9/11 America without 9/11 being mentioned. The whole of America is ash. So just like 9/11 having like deposited ash everywhere within New York, or mostly within the Manhattan, like Lower East Side, as well as the Lower Manhattan area. But the ash is everywhere. So the ash of 9/11 is everywhere in the novel. But not just that, I argue that it's something else as well. And there's something deviously sad about it being accepted as a central 9/11 novel. And I'll read to you an excerpt of like what I found to be some of the problematic things in it. So, first of all, it stands out as a post 9/11 great American novel because it does not talk about 9/11 at all, but instead extends its disaster into a future all-encompassing annihilation within the United States. The novel creates a landscape that is a warning of nuclear holocaust as well as ecological breakdown from climate change acceleration. However, McCarthy infuses the text with hope in the form of the father's protection going beyond an ordinary father's, because there is something otherworldly about his son's innocence and goodness. The father calls his son the Word of God, God's own fire drake, a god, a tabernacle, and also the best guy. At one point, he also calls his son's blonde hair a golden chalice, good to house a god. The narrator also refers to an ashen snowflake as the last host of Christendom. There are other invocations of what Lenore Bell calls a conservative idea of pure white Americans associated with a Nordic ideal of blonde hair and blue eyes in these references. Marcel Descoste notes how the framework of a Christian sensibility and iconography hold a central position in McCarthy's tale precisely as they serve as the enabling lexicon of the ethical, not just physical survival the father and son represent. While the novel features the protagonist dealing with secular dilemmas in the absence of any science fiction or fantasy elements, it nonetheless exhibits this ambiguous strain of Christianity, especially associated with the boy and his eventual survival into the narrative that continues beyond the end of the novel. What McCarthy is doing is no less than searing completely the American landscape, burning it free of impurity, and reinfusing it with the golden haired, blonde eyed boy so that goodness and whiteness can take over. The only way to get rid of Muslims or of Islam or of any other ideology except Christianity is to burn it all. That's the final solution. And it's very much like the final solution of the Holocaust. It is a Holocaust. It is a burning. It is a complete removal. But at the same time, at what cost? It is a fantastic imagination into the ultimate. But at the same time, that's what I believe has made this book more popular. Subconsciously, people have accepted that that's what it will take. That's what it will take. A Holocaust is what it will take. And that's why the final solution is such an impractical and such an obviously ultimate solution that should never even be considered. That's why it's being considered in metaphor, in an oblique way, in a very transcendent way by creating the apocalypse and imagining the beyond the apocalypse Christianity can be returned to America. So that's my study so far. And I go further than that into seeing what the post 9/11 literary landscape has been since then. And I found three trends in those novels, in those kinds of novels that have appeared. There are new kinds of repressions, especially in Jonathan Franzen's novels, and he's been touted as the great American novelist in the 21st century after David Foster Wallace committed suicide. his freedom, purity, and crossroads are all about families, like white suburban families that have dilemmas that have nothing to do with 9/11, but are inflected by 9/11. Something in the background is just this anxious thing about this generation, the multiple layers of generations, the boomers as well as their sons and then their grandkids growing up with this anxiety in the background of our freedoms are at stake, our purity is at stake, something's bothering us from the outside. So there's complete like repression over there. Then there's the other novels of the other writing back, and in this I don't just include Teju Cole with Open City, but and Ayad Akhtar with Homeland Elegies, but also the other from outside America writing back is much in the same vein of writing within the same paradigm of what 9/11 meant to the nation and also responding to it and saying like, but we're also like part of the victims and traversing the landscape of post 9/11 America as Muslims and suffering the indignities thrust upon being part of the being part of the larger demographic of like what also was the terrorist demographic, but at the same time responding in very much the same way as 9/11 early 9/11 authors did. Then there's the lead up to novels, or which try to capture the innocence of America to compare it to the post 9/11 moment of where, or the war on terror situation, where we're living in this constant fear slash trauma unresolved as a society or as individuals. And whereas before this, we were all dealing with much smaller issues. So there's Otessa Mosfel's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which ends at 9/11. And similarly, Pynchon's Bleeding Edge. And these are written much further after 9/11. And these are the three trends that I've found. And the culture that we exist in now, this is one of the other covers that was under consideration for my book, but this is where we are. Like we're still living here. We're thriving here individually and collectively also in some ways. But at the same time, we are also being targeted because we keep returning and the trauma for the white American that is unresolved keeps returning, not just in literature, but in public policy. As we see in world politics as well as domestic politics, the Mahmoud Mamdani election brought forth all of the discourse that was dormant, but not so hidden, not so subtly even hidden. We knew it was always going to surface. They made his beard bigger in advertisements. They talked about him in the same way that, oh, he's part of the horde. That same language kept popping up. But the only thing that suffers really is the American ideals, so-called American ideals. Discourse is poorer because it's not Mamdani's discourse is not being attacked as impractical beyond just saying, "Oh, that's impractical." There's no other discourse being produced, and there's no alternative solution being provided to economically emancipate the masses. That is not the concern. It's just identity politics. The Muslims have been dragged into it. So that's where I'm going to end, and I want to open it up for discussion. But what I really want to see you guys do, if you are still studied going beyond this, is take up this book. This is magnificent. It's Aaron Keeble's 21st Century Fictions of Terrorism. It informs beyond what the basic that I've given, as well as like it goes very well with my research as well. Aaron Keeble has been very kind as a person and helping me with my research. He's reviewed my book for me as well, and he's also created magnificent research on why the Islamophobic elements continue to inform post 9/11 as and what he calls the war on terror situation, not the post 9/11, but war on terror situation. And I agree that like much of it is that the looming towers are here because of the war on terror, and it's a nonsensical thing to call it the post 9/11 moment in many ways. And then to get more, this is a 2011 or 14 edition of Ground Zero Fiction by Bridget Dawes, and it's a magnificent collection of like all the fiction that was created by then. And what it does, she touts Jonathan Safran Foer's Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close is one of the best novels to come out of 9/11, and that came out very early. There is still room to create magnificent literature on this topic within the milieu, the social milieu that we're inhabiting, there's still material. There's still so much to write about. And I think much more imaginative, many more imaginative leaps can be taken to create literature that informs us of our situation, as well as illuminates for us what more can be done. And I would urge everywhere I go, everywhere I talk about this, I urge students to think about writing it in different ways. One of the students asked me, how do we dismantle the idea of our living in a linear world where many of us actually suspect 9/11 of being an inside job? How do I represent that on the page? And we can have a discussion about that as well. I have a few ideas of how I would do that if I wanted to do that. But yeah, I think I'll end it there because this is leading to what I think will be a fruitful discussion. So thank you so much for being part of this, and let's talk.